All right, welcome back, everybody. We are hopping right along and we are going to jump right into our next session. This session is titled Using the Loss Momentum Model to Explore Barriers to Transfer in BC. So the Loss Momentum Model examines events in students' post-secondary journeys to understand whether events impede or support students' progress. This study applies the Loss Momentum Model to the process of requesting and using transfer credit in BC to identify steps in the process where students' progress may be affected either positively or negatively. The outcomes of this analysis will assist institutions and individuals in identifying and addressing barriers that the BC transfer system users may experience. So at this time, it is my pleasure to welcome again Dr. Fiona McQuarrie, who is going to give us an overview of her research, and then she's going to stand by to take questions from the audience. So over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. My presentation today is the first part of a research project that I have in progress, and it uses a specific theoretical model to try to understand students' academic progress through their programs or through their credentials and how they use transfer credit in that process. So the overview of what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to explain the model first, and then I'm going to explain how I plan to apply it to help understand how students acquire transfer credit and use it in their programs in BC. So in existing research on transfer students, a lot of that research focuses on the experiences of transfer students or students with transfer credit and tries to frame that in the relationship between those experiences and their personal characteristics. Usually these are demographic characteristics such as age or gender or socioeconomic status. And so the sort of research that arises out of this are research looking at questions like, do students with specific demographic characteristics have different transfer credit experiences than students without those characteristics? The loss momentum model instead says that it's also important to understand how specific events or interactions through the student's academic progress affects their movement, and specifically within the context of transfer credit, how transfer-related interactions affect students' progress. So the goals of this study are first to use the loss momentum model to explore students' acquisition and use of transfer within the BC transfer credit system. I'm also interested in exploring what students do when they encounter barriers to transfer credit and how they adjust to those barriers and what effect the barriers have. And I'm also planning to make some recommendations for consideration. This presentation is going to focus primarily on the first goal, and towards the end of the presentation, I'll be offering some thoughts as to what the second and the third goals might look like. But to start with, I'm going to explain the loss momentum model. So as I mentioned, this model looks at specific interactions between students and institutions, specifically in the context of interactions that relate to transfer credit. And the model identifies 4 phases of the relationship between the student and the institution. The first is connection. This is usually when the student becomes interested in attending the institution and gathers information about it and perhaps has some preliminary interactions with the institution around admission. Then there's entry, where the student actually enters the institution, enrolls in it, and starts taking classes and acquiring credits. Progress. Pretty self-explanatory. The student acquires more and more credits and takes more and more courses and moves towards their goal or their desired outcome. And completion, when the student achieves the credential or completes a program or achieves whatever they set out to do when they entered the institution. And some researchers suggest that completion might also have a related 5th phase, which is continuation, if the student uses the credit that they have acquired or the credential that they've acquired to move into another program or another institution. So the model portrays the outcomes of specific interactions that students have with the institution around transfer as either resulting in loss or momentum. Loss is where obviously the student has a negative experience, and that can lead to delays in their academic progress or perhaps to them dropping out temporarily or permanently. Momentum, the student has a positive experience and the outcomes of the experience facilitate the movement towards their goals. So the focus of this model overall is on the institution or the system rather than the students. That's not to say that students' individual characteristics won't influence how they interact with the system or the institution, but the focus is on how the institution and the system interact with the student and how those interactions shape the student's experience. And the focus is also not on the outcomes, but on the events. The success of the loss momentum model isn't measured by completion rate or retention rate or anything like that. The success is measured by the quality of the interaction that the students have and how that results in loss or in momentum. So now I'm going to try to apply this model to the BC transfer credit system and explain how it might be relevant in understanding what happens in BC. So in the connection phase, the student becomes aware that they have the opportunity to acquire transfer credit or to use it. A loss in this phase would likely result from the student not making progress if that information is wrong. This includes also information from formal and from informal sources. Informal sources might be friends, peer groups, social media information. And in the case of some students, such as international students, it might also be information from third parties such as agents. So if the student is not well informed at this phase, that could result in a loss. Momentum, they have reliable information that facilitates their progress. And students in this phase who experience momentum also start to develop what's called transfer capital. This is a body of knowledge or experience or familiarity with transfer credit and transfer credit systems that they can draw on as they progress to help them move forward. In the entry phase, the student applies for transfer credit, and a loss at this phase could be from an incomplete application or from not understanding the process, particularly around unrealistic expectations as to how much transfer credit they might be eligible for or how that credit would apply to their program. Momentum, they would have realistic expectations based on accurate information, and they would know how to complete the application and how to provide the documentation that's needed. And here's where transfer capital comes into play as well, because the student would have that body of knowledge to help them move forward. In the progress phase, the transfer credit request is evaluated, and here at this stage, losses might result more from the system than from the student. For example, if there's no clear equivalency at the institution for the course involved in the transfer credit request, or if there's difficulty in the institution finding someone with the appropriate qualifications to evaluate the request. Momentum could be from the student providing the information that's needed, but also from there being a relatively straightforward equivalency that's easy to assess, and also if the institution does have qualified people, ideally several qualified people, who could provide a informed evaluation of the request. So some of the information or some of the factors that lead to whether this is a loss or momentum relate to the student, but more of them are institutional or procedural. And then finally, at completion, when the transfer credit decision is made, a loss would be that the request is denied or that the credit that's awarded is not what the student expects. For momentum, obviously the request is approved and the student gets the credit that they were hoping for. But there's also a possibility here for a loss to be converted into momentum because the student may have the opportunity to appeal the transfer credit decision. And even if they appeal the decision and it's not successful, they would gain transfer capital from that experience, and that could lead to momentum further on. So what this analysis tells us first is that loss is not always a barrier to progress. and also that what might be a loss for one student might result in a momentum for another student. We should also be thinking about the impact of losses. And here, this ties into something that gets raised quite regularly in my experience at articulation committee meetings, is whether it's more helpful to give a student the benefit of the doubt and to give them transfer credit, even if there isn't a explicitly clear equivalency between the courses. And the thinking here, I believe, is that giving the students a transfer credit would help them move along. And obviously that creates momentum in the context of this model. But if the student is given equivalency for a course where they haven't actually acquired the learning that that equivalency suggests, that could result in a loss for them later on if they are moving into subsequent courses where they don't have the body of knowledge that's needed for academic success or academic progress in that course. So this again points to that sometimes factors in the system are not clearly losses or not clearly momentum, and also that decisions that are made at one point that result in loss or momentum may result in either momentum or loss further down the line. So a couple of preliminary considerations that I would like to suggest at this relatively early stage. The literature in this area talks quite a bit about the importance of both the sending and the receiving institutions fully participating in transfer, not just in the sense of agreeing to award transfer credit, but also that there are staff, especially at the receiving institution, who know about the transfer agreement and know about the credit that the students have acquired who are coming into the institution as transfer credit students. So the importance of both sides of the transfer credit equation being well informed and participating actively in transfer credit is really important. Also, the idea that it's important to understand where are students getting information about transfer credit. And hopefully, if they're getting inaccurate information, there are ways to counteract that. And part of this also relates to that often there are staff or faculty who aren't formally designated as transfer credit experts, or transfer credit is not a central part of their job, who are advising students on transfer credit and which courses to take and which courses are most important to have when they move into a new program at another institution. So as much as possible, keeping in mind the difficulty of ensuring that everybody is fully informed about everything, is for institutions to think about who actually interacts with students around transfer credit, and making sure as much as possible that those individuals have accurate and up-to-date information to give to students. So the next steps in this are that I'm going to collect some data. So some of you at this presentation may be hearing from me in the next couple of months. My plan at the moment is to survey institutional websites to see how information about transfer credit is communicated to students, particularly around establishing expectations of the outcomes of the transfer credit system. Within the transfer credit system, the software platform that underlies the BC Transfer Guide, there is a feature now where institutions that are closing transfer requests without awarding credit, or who are denying credit, are required to give a reason. And I would like to look at those data to see if there is any trends or patterns that I can identify about about why students are not receiving transfer credit, and whether that has any relationship to the events that are highlighted in the loss momentum model. I'd also like to survey articulation committee chairs and registrars, because these are often the staff and the subject matter experts at institutions who deal most closely with transfer credit requests. And I'd like to ask them about things like how often do students appeal transfer credit requests or outcomes, and how often are those appeals successful, and also just generally around the types of transfer credit requests that they receive. How many of them seem feasible? How many of them are what we would call in sports the Hail Mary. I'll file this and see if I get the transfer credit for it, just to get a sense of where students are coming from. And I think also particularly articulation committee chairs, because they're usually faculty, I would be interested to get their sense of where students get transfer credit information from, because my own sense is that informal sources are sometimes more persuasive than formal sources, and that can be really problematic if those informal sources are inaccurate. So at this stage in the project, I would be delighted to receive feedback or questions because it obviously is still a project in progress. But thank you for attending, and I'll turn the floor back to Mike.
All right, and now it's my pleasure to once again welcome back Fiona McQuarrie, who's here to answer your questions. Hello, Fiona.
Hello again.
It's been a while, so good to see you
Yes.
again. All right, just a reminder to everybody that please put your questions into the question and answer, and I'll be happy to relay them to Fiona. The first question we have is from Stephanie Boychuk from VIU. For this kind of work, is there a difference in momentum for general credit versus specific course credit?
In the research that I reviewed, I would say no, that isn't a distinction. And part of that may be because most of the research that uses the loss momentum model is based on community college to university transfer in the US, which is largely based on course by course transfer or block transfer agreements. So I didn't see anything that suggested that the model would operate differently depending on the type of credit. But having said that, I can see that it could make a difference, definitely, especially if we're thinking about the situation of transferring credits from a trades or vocational program to an academic program.
What can institutions do to help faculty and staff have accurate information about transfer credit?
Oh my goodness. I think the first step in that is finding out where students are getting their information from. And that is difficult to track, especially if a lot of it is on social media through WhatsApp or texts or chats or that sort of thing. But finding out the sources that students rely on, obviously institutions can't patrol what students are saying to each other individually. But if institutions can at least direct students to sources of reliable information, like the institution's own website, or let them know that information is available on the BC Transfer Guide or with advisors or other support staff at institutions, I would see it as a two-step process. Find out where students are getting their information from and make sure that students know where the reliable information is.
We have a question from Susan for Sale from TRU, who I know very well. Are you able to share sources for transfer capital?
I can. I will. I have a list of the literature I've looked at so far. So, Susan, I can send some sources to you that might be helpful in learning more about that.
That's right. And if you need Susan's email, you can reach me. You might have it already, but I'm
I
in
think I
regular
do,
contact
but
with her.
yeah.
Sounds good. All right. We've got a question from Samantha May from Alexander College. Could you speak to the role of welcoming communications with students in creating momentum?
Okay. Yes, I think something that I've touched on in the presentation and in the work I've done on this project so far is the idea of establishing expectations and helping students establish realistic expectations. Part of the work I've just embarked on now is looking at institutional websites. And so far, I'm really pleased to see that most institutions, when on their transfer credit homepages, use language like you may be able to receive transfer credit, or you may be eligible for transfer credit, the key word there being may. And also just, I think an important part of welcoming students and informing them about transfer credit is also letting them know what the possible awards are and explaining, for example, the difference between assigned credit and unassigned or elective credit. Because that has an impact on whether the student may be able to use transfer credit that they receive towards the particular program that they're enrolled in.
There's a really good question, interesting question here from Tabitha Smith from CNC. Do you find that there is a successful way of tracking down and counteracting misinformation?
Oh my. Well, I would first say that's a little out of scope of what I'm trying to do with this project, but I would just go back to the idea of knowing where students are getting their information from, and then assessing the sources of their information. I mean, students exchanging information with each other through chat groups or WhatsApp or Reddit or whatever is fine if they're exchanging accurate information. That information may actually be quite helpful if it comes from someone who's gone through the transfer credit process and understands what you need to do to submit an application and to hopefully get the transfer credit you're expecting. But misinformation, that's really very challenging because there's all kinds of different types of misinformation that could be out there. So I would say in terms of counteracting it, I think the biggest step that institutions can take is to make sure that there's reliable information available from them, whether that be in writing on their website, posted online, or whether it's from faculty members or advisors or staff who deal with students who are seeking transfer credit.
There is a comment in the chat from Marnie Finlater, and I'll read it to you, and perhaps you could react to it. It would be interesting to see how external certification bodies impact the applicability of transfer credit. Many trades programs design curriculum according to specific learning outcomes established by STBC, and that equals limited transfer credit opportunities. For early childhood education, the ministry certification can be applied to cover groupings of coursework leading to the certification, which then increases opportunities for block transfer and advanced entry. Do you want to offer any comment on that comment?
Other than to say, I think it's an excellent idea. It's out of scope for what I'm doing with this particular project, but I think that would be an excellent topic. And there was a study that I did last year on the effect of external certifications and accreditation on programs and curriculum in BC. And you can find that on the BC CAT website. That addresses some of the issues that have been raised in this question.
That's right. And it's a very interesting paper. I would encourage you to take a look at that on the BC CAT website. If you just do a search for just professional accreditation, I think you should be able to find
that
the
will bring
report.
it up. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. In terms of the loss momentum model, do you think that it can be applied to types of transfer other than course to course?
I think it can because as I mentioned, it looks like it looks at events and specific events, and whether a student is, say, meeting with an advisor about course-to-course transfer or block transfer, it's still an interaction around transfer, and the outcome of that discussion or the actions that come out of it are going to affect whether the student experiences loss or momentum. So I definitely think it's useful in trying to understand the effects of all kinds of transfer, not just course to course.
All right, and I see that the link to the professional accreditation report has now been put into the chat. So thank you for doing that, Jen. So that's available to you if you'd like to find out more. I have a question for you in terms of how can institutions find out whether students are getting information on transfer from informal sources?
Ask them. I think obviously, we all know the methodological problems of using a small sample of students to represent the as a proxy for the experience of all students. But I think it would be very valuable for institutions to perhaps when students come in for advising to ask them what they know about transfer and where they got that information from. And if they are getting information from informal sources like friends or peers or posts online, then ask them, what information was there and have an assessment of how accurate it was. I think the first step in understanding that is understanding where the information is coming from.
All right. Looks like we have reached the end of the questions that have been populated in the chat. Really appreciate everybody for putting your comments in there. I think this was a really rich discussion. Thank you, Fiona, once again for this presentation. We'll look forward to the finished product.
Yep.
And what I will just tell our audience is that we're going to have a brief session at the start of the a noon hour to talk about the BC Cat Transfer Awards. So you'll want to join us for that. And so we'll just take a brief pause and we'll be right back at it at 12 o'clock sharp. Thank you, Fiona.